Mark Twain was born Samuel Langhorne Clemens on November 30th, 1835, in Florida, Missouri. He moved to Hannibal, Missouri, and grew up playing on the banks of the Mississippi River, which influenced the setting of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which were two of his works that gained international prominence. In The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Twain combined the nostalgia for his childhood with violence, cruelty, and racism. Huck's compassion seems to prevail above bigotry in the novel. In the novel, Huck's view of the slave named Jim broadens as the novel progressed. Huck ultimately decides to save Jim from slavery, but goes back on his promise when he learns from Tom that Jim is already free. This represented the changing attitudes of the progressive era, but there was still work to be done.
Smell that, Huck? Smell like freedom. And if that's K-Row, I'm a free man. And when I'm free, I'm gonna work hard and save every penny and buy my wife and my children. And if they won't sell them, I'll steal them.
You wouldn't.
Well, if they won't sell them, Huck, they're my wife and my children. It ain't right that they be bought and sold.
He developed a love for storytelling from his experiences with his parents' slave children and liked to explore nature. In 1847, his father died, and at age 11, Samuel left school and took a job as a printer's apprentice at a local newspaper. Through this experience, he read news from all over the globe. After 3 years, he started working for his older brother, and with the pen name SLC, he wrote and published an essay for the Carpet Bag magazine in Boston. His newspaper business with his brother eventually went through financial trouble, so he moved to New York City and Philadelphia when he was 18. He wrote short stories and tall tales for the newspapers, using his observations for inspiration. In 1857, he returned to Missouri and became a riverboat pilot on the Mississippi River. This led to him meeting many diverse people and inspired topics for writing such as Life of the Mississippi. During the Civil War, he joined a Confederate regiment but quit after 3 weeks. His writing became more realist, and he was regarded as an outstanding realist author. Since he now had to make a living, he traveled west in 1861 to meet with his brother Orion, who was Secretary of the Nevada Territory at the time. While wanting to get rich from the Silver Rush, he met Native Americans and Westerners, who influenced his novels. Since he didn't get rich from the Silver Rush, he wrote for the newspaper Territorial Enterprise and used the pen name Mark Twain for the first time. He didn't stay in the same place very long, so he left for San Francisco in 1864 and continued to write for local newspapers.
In 1865, he wrote Jim Smiley and His Jumping Frog. It was a big hit, and Mark Twain became a recognizable name. While on a trip to Europe, he met a man named Charles Langdon who had a sister named Olivia. They married in 1870 and had a son in 1871, but their son died 2 years later due to a throat infection. The same year, he published a book called Roughing It, which was about frontier adventures, and their daughter Susie was born later. In 1873, he wrote The Gilded Age with Charles Dudley Warner. In it, he attacked corruption, big business, and obsession with wealth. He also coined the term Gilded Age. In 1874, Hartford Mansion was built, which was designed by himself. He lived there during the prime of his career. While living there, he wrote The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He was considered the greatest humorist of the age, and he drew crowds when he spoke. He wrote other profitable novels, and by 1885, he wrote memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant. Even though he had a large amount of money, he made poor investments and neared bankruptcy. In 1896, Susie died of meningitis when she was 24 years old, and Clemens sold the mansion in 1903 after her death. He restored his finances after traveling lectures. In 1898, he witnessed both the Spanish-American War and the Philippine War, which angered him. Because of this, he started to publicly state himself as an anti-imperialist and was against territorial expansion. His later writing started to show his grief over Susie's death and his attitude about the government. Because of his political beliefs, magazines started to refuse to publish his works. He traveled to Italy in 1904, but his wife died while there. In 1905, Theodore Roosevelt invited him to the White House, despite Twain's beliefs. In 1906, his daughter Jean was put in an asylum, and she died in 1909. In 1908, he moved to an estate in Redding, Connecticut, and died on April 21st, 1910, from a heart failure when he was 74 years old. People generally seem to claim that he belonged to all regions of America. To quote Thomas Edison, "An American loves his family. If he has any love left over for some other person, he generally selects Mark Twain."